Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to talk about a very hot topic. Obviously, insecurity, especially where do you start? There's so many things you could talk about, but ransomware seems to be in the front of lots of people's minds. Obviously, we're all involved in IT security, different areas of that kind of technology area. But even if you were to speak to average man in the street, average Joe, you ask them, do they know what ransomware is? Probably most people would know what that is. And that's a very different change from where we are now to going back a few years where people might not know what a Trojan was or know the difference between what a Trojan is and what a virus might be or what a worm might be. So we thought, as it's in everyone's minds, this is a good kind of topic to talk about and the approach to it. So my sub-agenda, I'm going to cover these topics. So basically set the scene just to make sure we're on the same level playing field of what ransomware is and where it's come from and where it's kind of is now and where it's growing or going to. Then we're going to kind of look at a defence overview. So what strategies should you be looking at to approach and try and kind of limit and defeat this? We're going to then look a little bit deeper than that into specific layers of defence. And then we're going to touch on the architecture. And then we've got a few kind of key takeaways or key messages for you to think about when you leave here at the end of today. So let's talk about some basics. So here we've got the problem statement. So on the left-hand side, it's very easy for people to pick up ransomware. You've got email, web, malvertising, phishing, or if they're very kind of keen, spear phishing. And a lot of those spear phishing campaigns or spear phishing, they will take an awful lot of time researching who they're going to actually kind of target. So gone are the days of I'm some print somewhere and I've got all this money, I want you to help me launder it. They'll take time, they'll use social media that we mentioned before to find out a lot about their intended target. So a good example might be your son or daughter plays a sport at the weekend, you get an email saying from someone who went to the same school as you supposedly, and your child scored a great goal at the weekend, don't know if you got it, here's a link to the video. You may laugh and scoff, but an awful lot of people would be taken in by that and they would click that, and that's all it would take. So something else behind this as well, the thing with Bitcoins, it's a very easy infrastructure for these cyber criminals to get paid for what they're doing in a very anonymous way. And as you'll see in a second when we come on to it, that has been a real enabler, if you like, for this ransomware to grow kind of exponentially from where it began. And on this other side, this is kind of the effect of that ransomware. In some instances, it can be life-threatening, this first one. If it's a health trust or hospital specifically, and there have been some stories recently in the press around that, that could stop critical operations happening if they can't look at a patient's records and see what they're allergic to, for example, or if there's certain anaesthetics that wouldn't work with that patient. So this could stop or maybe endanger life, as would the 999 or emergency services. Banking, those kind of things obviously affected, and obviously if you're a retail customer, you're not able to process people's orders, that's having a massive effect on your business directly. So it's a lot of business impact around this. So as I mentioned, ransomware is actually an awful lot older, and it's just come off the screen there. So 1989 was the first instance of that, and quite a lot of people might not realise how long this has actually been around. And as I mentioned before, the advent of things like Bitcoin make it very easy for these criminals to be able to gather their money in a very anonymised way. So then tracking them and finding out and checking the movement of this money is much more difficult. So at this point in time here, if you can see all these different names, I'm going to call them out each one, you can kind of see the names there. This has kind of almost been a driver or enabler for this to kind of grow and grow and grow. And what we're first seeing now, the Samsung has just gone off the screen here, this is one of the first types of thing which is kind of self-supporting. So you see in a second, a lot of these rely on an exploit, then a dropper, then the ransomware is kind of then installed, and it wants to make a connection back to its like command and control for keys and for being paid. But this Samsung is actually self-sufficient and doesn't need to do an awful lot of that. And that's the first thing we've kind of seen about a different way that these criminals are changing the way in which they're doing. Because obviously it's a kind of an arms race, that as quick as they do something, all the security companies, Cisco included, are looking at what they're doing, trying to predict where they're going and what they're doing to raise the defences that you've got access to. And then once the malware writers or the criminals know that we're doing that, they'll raise their game and change it. And it's kind of all this all the time. So this is the kind of monetary gains we're talking about. So first 3 months of 2016, 200 million. And if you look at that rate, 1 billion just in was 2016. And one example, just the Anglo exploit, 60 million. So it's a huge amount of money for these guys to make. So this is the incentive for them to do it. It's big business for them. I added a couple of these. So I kind of edited this slide a few days ago, last week, and I just had a quick look on the register, and there was an awful lot of stories on the register. So I just want to pick out a couple. This one here is quite ingenious. So targeting HR departments, making out you're interested in jobs, sending some documents, and then getting ransomware into an environment in that way. Looking at schools as well, so it doesn't matter from big, from small, healthcare, councils, no one is kind of immune from this stuff, unfortunately. So when I then looked again, just a week later, there was all these more stories as well. And there was a UK hospital. Fortunately, it turned out not to be ransomware, it was some other form of malware, but it could have been. And they're indiscriminate. This one particularly insidious, a non-profit cancer targeting a charity. So let's have a look at the defence overall, our overview. A little bit like you would take an approach to DOS and DDoS, there's no one thing, no one magic bullet to solve this problem. You've got to look at it in a few different ways. Obviously, if you can prevent it at the border, then it's kind of less impact to your business. So at a gateway, if you can stop it at that point, that's a great place to stop it. If it bypasses that or you're not able to stop it at that point, then you need to think about layers and at which point next could we try and stop that. And then worst case is if it is in there, you need some form of containing it. So if it does compromise a machine or that HR person or whoever's been spearfished, whoever it might be, how can we lock that down and stop it spreading laterally within our environment, or even know it's there in the first place? Because the average detection rate, sometimes the industry average is about 100 days to detect some things, which is way, way too long in terms of security of the world we live in. However, as good as all of this might be, you must have this backup and recovery element within it. And the first time, or you really need to have this sorted out and a strategy and a process in place and the people trained in order to handle this before you get this. The time to think about a process and what we're going to do is not when you've already got it. And the time to find out your backups are not running or they're not as good as you thought they were isn't when you've got ransomware. So you definitely want to kind of think of this. Now, we're not going to cover it today, but there's one important element that is often overlooked. So in all the years that I've been in security and then IT prior to that, the projects that have worked well and been more successful is where the user has been taken into account. So user awareness and user training. We're not covering it here, but I just want to call that out. That's extremely important because as good as all of this is, generally the weakest link in a chain in any organisation is the user or click monkeys or whatever you want to call them, and we've all got them. So a very good thing that we do internally actually at Cisco is we have kind of dummy phishing campaigns. So our own IT will send out some very, very carefully worded emails that do look real. And if users end up clicking on that, they've gone to a page, warned about that, and would they like some training? And it's just kind of more in the forefront of people's minds that just randomly clicking things does have and can have a dramatic effect on the company they work for and obviously their own data at home. So I'd say, really, absolutely include the user within this. Maybe it's an assumption that's been made, but I just wanted to call that out. Don't assume the users are kind of doing what they want to do or doing what you think they should be doing. Make sure they're included in any kind of IT or security project so they're aware of it and kind of give them a chance and help them be good citizens when they're at work. So talking about backups, this needs to be very carefully thought about. Because obviously, if a machine becomes infected with ransomware and it's trying to spread laterally, it's looking at all the network shares it has, if you've got a connected device to backups all the time, then there's nothing to stop that ransomware reaching out potentially and encrypting that backup. So you need to know the backups are working, offsite storage, rotate them, get them back and check and actually restore things from them. And this needs to be cast iron, because if all those other elements and layers have failed, what you're going to be looking at is your backup or you're going to pay. Now, if you do pay, there's not a guarantee, as we've seen in the press, that you'll actually get your files back and they'll be unencrypted. So some of these malware people have kind of got the encryption wrong, and I'm sure Alison can talk about that, of where they've got it wrong, but they've messed up the keys, basically. So when you get back the key you think you paid for, it doesn't actually work, and your files are not decrypted anyway. So you paid that money, which again is encouraging them, and they're getting payback. So wherever possible, we'd obviously encourage people not to pay that. But if everything's failed and your backup isn't what you thought it was, or you can't get it back, and that data is that important to you, probably the only thing you're left with is to pay. So let's talk about how it kind of works. So pretty much, obviously it could be on a USB stick dropped in a car park or a CD-ROM, but we're kind of talking about other vectors that could come in on. So emails could come in, phishing or spear phishing. It could be a web link within there. It could be an attachment in an email. It could be a redirect. It could be a website that's been compromised itself, or maybe, quite often, the malvertising. So they've compromised the advertising site that is then pointed to from the site that you're going to. And in lots of instances, if the wrong vulnerability is available in your browser, someone wouldn't even have to click on anything. Just by the page rendering would be enough for that exploit to be, or the vulnerability you have to be taken advantage of. So that's what I've just kind of talked ahead of myself a little bit. So here we've got the exploit kits, and then their kind of job is to enable and find a vulnerability, hook into something or program, enable the file to be dropped down, for it to be installed, then it can then connect back, and it's looking for the encryption keys, and then the method of payment of however they can actually extract the money from you. So here's some kind of quite well-known examples of ransomware, and Macs are not immune. So this is one of the first ones we've seen for Macs. And this one here, Samsung I mentioned earlier, a lot of these rely on back channels to carry on and do work or bring things down or for payment or for the keys, whereas Samsung doesn't rely on that. It doesn't use any C2 stuff, which is the first example we've seen of that. Hopefully none of you have seen any of this in your environments. That's kind of a, I'm not expecting anyone to put their hand up. Oh yeah, we have. So let's talk about how we can maybe prevent some of this. So from like a phishing campaign and spam and that kind of stuff, email is a good vector to do that. So we can look at an email security solution to block that. We can look at the attachments. We can look at web links within an email to see where they're really going, what they're doing. Just because it says something doesn't mean the URL behind it is what it actually says. So we can validate where that link's going and what it's doing. Is that a safe site or not? Is it known to be hosting malware? Is it to do with a phishing campaign? Then if there is web redirects or links within here, we can also look, and we recently acquired OpenDNS. We've now called that Umbrella. So we can look at the intelligence they have about DNS and IP resolution for that and see, is this on their list of known things? Is it associated with bad areas? Do we want and trust where that's trying to go? So this is obviously a very good place to stop it. At the perimeter, it's not got anywhere near the endpoint yet, and there's no effect on the business if you can kill it at this point here. However, if it has gone further through, then we can start looking at advanced mail protection, that kind of thing, and maybe using the ThreatGrid sandboxing capability. So if we can't make a disposition of the file immediately and we see it as unknown, we can send it off to Sandbox, do it locally if you've got an on-premise version, and then you can see what's that file actually trying to do, and then get a disposition of it. And then again on the back channel, we can look at Umbrella. So is it trying to go connect back? So if some of these other things have not caught it, we've got different places that we could catch it. So this is now talking about something coming through and actually being on an endpoint. So obviously what it wants to do from that point is connect back, and also, as I mentioned, it wants to kind of spread laterally. So if it has a worm capability, is it going to try and look and see what it can attach to or connect to, and then further spread across your environment? So if you can't stop it and it has got in, you want quickly to know it's there and limit what it can now do. Otherwise, it's going to affect a load more machines, and the impact to your businesses is going to be much higher. So on this level, what we can do from StealthWatch, Cisco acquired Landcope a while ago, and that is all about looking at net flow and behavioural and spotting anomalies. So you baseline behaviour, and then you can see when a machine starts to talk somewhere it never normally does, or a user's logging in from somewhere they never normally do, those kind of things. So it's very easy to spot anomalies if you're looking at net flow and you know what is normal behaviour. So then on the outbound, from a next-gen firewall, we can look at the CNC connections, we can update from streaming lists and security intelligence down to this kind of solution, and then we can kind of stop it connecting back. Then we have our identity service engine, so that's our kind of NAC on steroids. So via an integration with PX Grid, we're able to hook these things together. So if within the Stealth Watch we're seeing anomalous behaviour and you've analysed it, you can hit a button, tell ICE, it'll do change of authentication for this kind of compromised machine and VLAN it off or quarantine it. So you can take some very quick remediation. The integration with next-gen firewall is automatic, so if we see and some malware on here or see certain things happening, you can have correlation rule that say if you see this, then this, then tell ICE to quarantine it. So you've got two different ways of very quickly identifying things are going wrong on this particular host, and you can lock it down and stop it from connecting back, maybe stop it getting the keys, stop it encrypting, and definitely stop it from spreading to other hosts. So what I'm going to walk through now is some examples of cloud email security, Umbrella, which is OpenDNS, and then AMP for endpoints. So just seeing what they could do to help stop this. So as we mentioned, if we can stop it here, great, because it's right at the edge, it's not got internal infrastructure, and it's not had an impact to your business. So what we want to do is block it with email security at this point, so we're stopping the exploit kit from even getting any further. So as I mentioned before, you might have what looks like a normal URL in a phishing email. However, behind it, it's trying to go somewhere it shouldn't go. And also, this is not a real footer, but it's kind of drawing someone in, making them think this is actually from my bank, and they're more likely to click on it. So again, this comes back to that user awareness piece that I mentioned, letting users know how clever and how realistic some of these things could look. And these have changed up years ago. They were very easy to spot, but now not so much. So in here, what we're able to do, when Cloud Email Security has identified an unknown URL that's potentially malicious, we can strip it, we can rewrite it, and then when the user goes to that particular page, in this instance, if it was bad, it would have been blocked. But we're saying it's unknown at this point. We think it's malicious, but from customer feedback, they don't want us to automatically block it in this instance. This is configurable. So in this instance, we've got a choice to carry on or not go there. And again, this is all part of that user awareness that they've seen this, and hopefully it gets them thinking in a slightly different way. So this next one, so Chuck Robbins is our head of Cisco. So here we're seeing an email with here. So now we're going to look at OpenDNS. So those URLs that may be pointing to a malicious website or something we're not certain about or we've marked as bad, we want to be able to stop it at this point here. So what we're going to walk through is seeing an email come in with a link. We're going to see the user click on it. We're going to be warned about it and blocked. And then this is the console for Umbrella, and then we can see the event being blocked. So if we just walk through this. So this is the email I mentioned. So what this demo is supposed to show, if you remember back, so if we just rewind, a user gets this email, looks very convincing, they click on this link, behind the scenes, Umbrella, which was OpenDNS, is going to look at that and realise it's not somewhere you want that user to go, and then they'll block it, and then we'll get and see the GUI or the monitor admin, the console for OpenDNS, and you can see the event. Now at this point it's supposed to work, which it's going to. Excellent, hooray! So here goes the user. Yeah, I'm going to click on this. Of course I want my mailbox to be bigger. So behind the scenes, thank you for fixing that, Abby. I'm going to buy you a drink later. And then behind the scenes, the user is trying to resolve that site. OpenDNS does its lookup, realises it's bad and blocks it. And we've saved a day, user doesn't get the ransomware, or whatever malware it might be. And then when we look at the console for that, we can see that was the site, if those of you got really good eyesight, internet bad guys, and we've seen the machine it came from, the date and time, and the fact it was blocked, and the category from OpenDNS was phishing. But that could be malware, any other number of different categories that they've got. So now what we're going to talk about is, remember back, rewind, stop it as far away from the business as we can. But if it does get through, this layered approach that we've talked about, and this is going to show what happens and how we can stop it if it gets to the endpoint. So in this instance, Advanced protection on the endpoint, as we mentioned, Talot's reach, we see more, therefore the telemetry and information we have can protect people quicker. That's the whole idea of that. So this is known malware. So in this instance, this user, please work. Yes, it's going to work. So here, yes, of course, I want this wonderful game. I'm going to go down here and download this. Now at this point, they try to install and run this, and up here, AMP on the endpoint is seeing and understanding, it knows about that malware and it's going to block it. So again, right at the last ditch by the endpoint, we've been able to stop it. Then this next one, if you remember my story about because of how much we see and the reach that we have, we might see a new campaign happening in one area of the world which is ahead by a few minutes or a few hours than the UK is. So it's in this instance, unfortunately, someone does get attacked, but it's then how quickly can we learn from that, and how quickly can we then protect every other customer by their sharing of that information. So as we see, this comes online. So here the same, oh no, go back. Too eager to click. I'm one of those click monkeys I warned people about earlier. So here, we're going to go and download this, different file this time. The user goes and installs it, runs that file, and in this instance it's successful. If we then go and look at the folder of this machine, if you look, it doesn't sound very long, but if you look at the extensions, these are called fun files. So now we've already had the bad thing that happens, and then quite often you'll get this pops up now, and they want to play a game that you really don't want to be part of. And this is going to show that timer I mentioned about of how long you've got to pay before they're going to bin those keys. And so going forward a little bit more, we've now seen that malware has been sent up to the threat grid or on-premise version. We've exploded it. We know it's malware. We changed the disposition of that file to malware. So the next person that encounters that, which could be as short as a few minutes later or a couple of hours, rather than the typical 100 to 200 days detection we mentioned earlier, now we can protect that straight away, very, very quickly. So what we've talked about is a whole load, and hopefully you've got this concept that there is no magic one way of doing this, apart from I take that and give it a good kick and never use it again, and then it's really secure. But obviously security always has to balance with productivity in business, and depending on how risk averse a customer is. But hopefully you've got the idea that you need a layered approach. You will really want to stop it as far out at your perimeter as possible, but you have to be realistic that that's plan A, so you need a plan B. And the plan B is being realistic that unfortunately, as good as any vendor, and Cisco, I say, is right up there, obviously. But some small amount might get through. And if it does, what ability do you then have at these later stages to even spot it's there and to stop its intent before it gets to this point? We've got a whole load of the links over here, and these slides were sent to you via PDF. So we have an architecture for framework for security called SAFE, and one of them is a particular CVD on ransomware, and that talks about all of the things that I've talked about in much greater length. And this was checked against more than 20 real malware samples, ransomware, to see its effectiveness in trying to stop and limit this. And remember, you've got different teams probably in your organisation. Some deal with the endpoint, so you can think about what capability have I got here, how can I stop at the endpoint? You've also got people that deal with either network or security, or maybe they do both. So you can look at email security, web security, you can look at enabling security on ISRs from Cisco, for example. So AMP and a lot of the next-gen firewall and snort capability is available on these platforms too. So you've got different areas that you can start looking to kind of do that. So the key takeaways. So far, it's the most profitable malware we've seen. You've seen the big numbers and the drivers and how easily they can collect the money, and it's not going away anytime soon. If anything, it's getting worse. It doesn't care who it targets. So hospitals, charities, big organisations, small individuals at home, there's no kind of common denominator amongst it. So you need a layered approach. Stop it at the perimeter if you can. If you can't, think of other areas where you can catch it. And the quickest way of standing something up is the cloud services. So there's less infrastructure, not things to worry about. So you can very more quickly protect yourself and looking at things like this. And that's it.